right? So I just want you to notice that. I want you to notice that your brain right now is operating under a lie. So when you notice your brain thinking this, I want you to identify it. I want you to identify it and say, oh, this is just my brain thinking that I'll feel better if I keep this idea that I have some influence over what he's doing, because it's easier to believe this lie and have this false sense of control than it is to just feel out of control. Because when we fully recognize and accept that our husband can watch pornography, whether or not we ask him 100 times a day about it, that's when we realize that we actually don't have control over him, and it doesn't really feel very good. Our brain hates that. Okay, our brain really wants to avoid feeling out of control, which is how we feel when we fully accept there's nothing we can do about this.
True.
Right? Does that make sense?
It does.
Now, the other thing that I wanted to go over that you brought up, well, first let me go to this comment. I can totally relate to this. I am terrified that I'm going to get comfortable or lazy or too relaxed about the whole situation, and that will make him think, oh, well, I can relapse and she won't even know because she's gotten so lax about the situation. Okay, I love this, because this is again another lie that your brain is believing, that you are somehow in control of his behavior. I want you to notice the lie in this, and because I know your specific situation, your husband did not start watching porn because you were lax about it. Okay? If it were true that you being lax or comfortable or relaxed about the situation is what was going to make him watch pornography, then it would have, like, that would have had to have happened in the reverse in the first place. Does that make sense? Or you not being comfortable with him watching pornography and you being stressed out about it would mean that he wouldn't watch it. And yet I know there are so many women on this call who are not comfortable and are totally anxious and not relaxed at all, and their husband is still watching it. Right? I spent years being anxious and uncomfortable and not lax or lazy at all, and my husband was still watching it. If it were true that your relaxation level and your lack of anxiety and your comfort level, if it was like directly related to how comfortable you are, then yes, that would make sense. Right? But it would also follow that the more anxious you are, the less likely he is to relapse. But that's not true. In fact, my husband says the exact opposite. He says that the more I healed from it, actually enabled him to heal from it more, because he was less stressed about what I was going through and he was able to work on what he was going through. That's not the case for everybody. I'm just saying that that's what actually was one of the things that helped him the most, was me getting my own healing, was me working through it. And again, what I want to offer is I want you to notice that this is a lie that your brain is believing, is that, let me scroll back up here. I want to get your words. Is that we are somehow comfortable with the idea of him watching pornography. And that is very different than us being okay with it. Does that make sense? Accepting that you do not have control over your husband and his choices is not the same as being comfortable with him watching pornography. I can accept that my husband is a grown man and has the ability to make choices that I am not okay with, right? That doesn't mean that I'm comfortable with the choices that he's making. In fact, I'm very uncomfortable with the choices that he's making, but I accept that those are his choices and that they're not my responsibility and that I have no influence over those decisions. Do you guys see the difference? Does that make sense?
Makes a lot of sense.
Right? So our level of relaxation, our lack of anxiety is not going to be the thing that tells him it's okay if he watches porn, because he knows you're not okay with it, ladies. Trust me, he knows. He knows that you're not comfortable with it. But you staying uncomfortable and anxious about it 24/7 is a lie that your brain has. It's like, okay, the more uncomfortable we are, the more anxious about this, the less likely it is to happen. That's just a lie that your brain believes in order to keep the anxiety, because the anxiety feels productive. It feels like it's keeping us safe. That's what our brain thinks. Our brain thinks that if we're anxious about it, if we're doing something, and anxiety feels like it's productive. Anxiety feels, it's a false productivity, right? If we're worried about something, it feels like a good thing. We're thinking about it constantly. It feels like we're taking action, even though we're not. So even though it's an unproductive emotion, it feels productive. It's a false productivity, and our brain likes productivity. Our brain would rather feel like it's doing something to combat this, even though it's not. Right? This is what gives us that false sense of control, because we don't actually have any control over this. It's a lie that our brain is just believing. So our brain likes anxiety because it feels productive. It feels like we're taking action. It feels like we have control over this when we actually don't, which is why our brain wants to keep believing that lie that creates more of the anxiety. And if that lie is, oh, I need to ask him about it 100 times a day, and that's what helps him stay away from it, or, oh, I need to be anxious about it because if I'm not, then he'll relapse. Whatever the lie is that our brain believes that keeps the anxiety, it will keep running that. So when you notice that, I want you to identify it, just like I told you. Identify it and say, oh, this is just my brain believing a lie, so that I don't have to feel out of control. But if you know how to feel your feelings, then it's okay to feel out of control. That's just an emotion that we just feel.